Welcome to the this episode of the human condition. We have already looked at why it is so important for us to understand the human condition, especially at a time when there's so many things happening in this world. The culture that is extremely volatile, constantly changing, a culture that is very uncertain globally, a lot of complexity, many things are interconnected, and we know how difficult it is with high rising costs of things, and with things transition from human work to artificial intelligence and robots who are going to take over. So it brings a lot of fear and anxiety in in humanity. And so we need to address this and address it from God's perspective so that we have a real solution. And so we talked about why understanding the human condition is important from the scripture, from the book of Hosea, talking about we want to understand it so that we know how to return, how to find a solution to it. We talked about what is the human condition. The human condition is the experience, the common experience that we have: fear, anxiety, worry, restlessness, busyness, frustration, and all these are connected. All these is connected, and I want to say it's connected to shame. And this is where we want to start on how do we return back to God when God says, because of this broken relationship, you're going to experience woundedness, you're going to feel that nobody loves you. And because of that, fear, anxiety, worry, the stress response of flight, fight, or freeze, helplessness. And then everybody wants to belong. So we are trying to belong to a political party, or trying to belong to a church, or trying to belong somewhere where we can feel safe. And I think it's important for us to have a safety net and a safe place and safe people around us who will accept us as who we are so that we can work out our own human condition. The goal is to help you, just as I'm trying to help myself, become more compassionate within my heart, trying to live from my heart, not from the head. Head is always uh, differentiating and judging, and that's the only way the head can do. But Christ is the head, and we are the body, so we need to know how to be the body of Christ, so that God can do His work among us, in us, and through us by His grace. So let's talk about why this is, why or how we need to return back to God when God says, I will woo you, I will draw you into the desert, into a solitary place, and I will speak to you with a tender voice. It's important for us to know the tender voice of God, and it can't be heard when we are living in a world full of noise. This is why the practice of silence and solitude is so important, so that we can learn the love language of God. Okay? We need to know the love language of God. Love is poured out, and yet we receive that in not our active, not only in our active life, but in our stillness. So I invite you now as we talk about a few things. And we talked about shame being the primary thing when humankind got separated from God and was hiding. They were hiding because of shame, because there was a hole in the heart, and we didn't want anybody to see the feelings of guilt and, oh, I've done this wrong thing, and disobeyed God. And so we want to talk from that perspective as and here's how it's often seen. That you and I can recognize. Have you ever felt that your parents are more favoring your brother or sister? Have you felt upset because a teacher disliked you when you were growing up? Or is there a moment in life and you look at the past that you regret and say, I wish I had not done this? Have you been laughed at? When you send an idea to your family or friends, or do you have any bitterness against your in-laws, or are you worried about things? So next month, will I have the support? Will I have an income? Or, have you avoided doing tasks or overreacted? When something was asked, are you engaged in eating too much or eating very little? Have you abused any drugs or without any medical reasons? Do you feel a need to constantly be perfectionist? Or have you ever felt I need to be withdrawn and be alone for an extended period of time? Have you ever felt worthless that the voice that you hear in your head, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you don't have the intelligence, you don't have the skills, you don't have the ability to speak, your whatever, your skin is not right, you are too fat or are you too thin, all these things are coming out of shame. And that's the point we want to make as we enter into finding a solution on how to return back to God, and also how to. So let me share my screen. How to overcome this shame in our lives. And this is so important in this journey, because God says that we are unfaithful to his presence. The unfaithfulness, if you look at it, my people have departed from me, means God is not in one place and we have departed, or God is sitting in a prayer room and we didn't come to. No, I think what it means, how I understand is God's presence is everywhere, but our mind is not aware of Him consciously. And so our mind is consciously aware of other things. That is the problem. Our attachment to things that we want in our lives. And so practicing faithfulness is simply acknowledging God and saying, God, I'm here. And so it's so important when we come to that place of God, I'm here and I want you to give me the answer, or basically it's acknowledging God, and from there being able to surrender whatever is troubling us, or whatever we are desiring. So how to practice faithfulness? If you can see my screen right now and follow with me. We want to talk about shame. We already saw that from the biblical perspective of how humanity departed from God and was hiding in the Garden of Eden. But from the life perspective, from the existence, our experience perspective, we want to talk about it. Eden, in my understanding, literally the word means delightful place, delightful presence, a place of unceasing life, unconditional love, and unending joy. Everybody had everything that they needed. So you have to picture yourself, if you are in the Garden of Eden, you would have had everything what you needed. And because of that, you had no need. As Psalmist said, the Lord is my shepherd, I have no need, no wants. Because everything was provided, whatever was needed for life, whatever was needed to be loved, and whatever was needed to belong was provided. There was no wounding, there was no competition, there was no deception. It was a perfectly loving place. Why? Because God has given everything what we need. Ideally, this is what God wanted for us, that joy would be our portion, that life would be abundant, and love would be unconditional. And love continues to be unconditional. So, here is an important thing from a biologist who is an atheist, but he says that human beings are interconnected beings. The mind and body is not separate as we think it is, especially in the Greek philosophical idea. Rather, he says humanity. So the question he's asking is, what does it mean to be human in this world that is becoming more artificially intelligent? That is a question I am also asking. How do we stay human when we are constantly interacting with machines? So he says that we are not just a biological body. We have nerves that can feel, that can sense. We also have mind, a brain that is able to, the right brain and the left brain. The left brain is able to analyze, calculate, ask questions, critique, whereas the right brain is able to absorb things as it is. So this is an amazing thing that God has gifted us with, the ability to rationalize, to ask questions, to think deeply. But he says not only that, we are also having consciousness that is connected to a higher intelligence. He calls it higher intelligence, which we would call it as God. The capacity to relate to God is what makes us the living soul, a living soul, meaning God is breathing into us not only the breath of life, but also the whisper of love, also the feeling of connection, also the experience of belonging to God. This is our joy because we're not created to be alone. So I want you to introduce the idea of contemplation as something that was there in the beginning. God gave us, listen carefully, God gave us the gift of contemplation. The idea of contemplation is to see the whole thing and make a choice. It's like discerning the whole thing or seeing the whole picture and obeying God when there are many choices. Okay, so you picture this scenario is God gave trees for the body, fruit and vegetable. God gave um, uh, the tree of life for us to experience love, to experience energy, and to experience belonging. And then he gave the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I put here as KOGE, the knowledge of good and evil, as something for to um, have a choice to go after. So he said, if you eat of that tree, if you partake of that tea, if you participate in that kind of thinking, independent thinking, then you're going to go away in your own. So it is going to lead you to death. You're going to go away from life if you pursue that. So he said, don't do that. But the idea is all this was available, and God wanted us to make a choice. Adam and Eve chose to listen to the voice of the enemy of God and said, I want to be like God. I don't want the tree of life to be sufficient. I want to have my own life. I want to have my own rules. I want to I want to determine what is good and what is evil. And so we took that from God. What God said, I will determine what is good and evil. Now we are saying, no, I will determine what is good and evil. And so man has that is the power of contemplation, is the ability to see the whole thing and choose to obey God or to disobey God. And we disobeyed God because of what? The rebellion in the heart. I want to be like God. So this is where contemplation leads us away. So anytime we are coming back to contemplation, it is to obey the will of God, the plan of God, meaning to surrender to God's will. So think about it. Contemplation is a gift. So this is what's exercised. That is why we have to come back to contemplation in order to say, sorry, God, we made a mess of it. Now we want to surrender and obey your will. So rebellion leads to disobedience because we were ripped apart from God and there is a hole. in the heart that we are trying to cover with fig leaves because now we discover we are naked and all the ugliness is seen, whatever that is, the guilt, feelings of guilt and shame, and we're trying to cover it up. And that's what we see in this picture, the great cover up. And so, human condition is caused by one experience, the experience of being ripped apart from God and becoming naked. The presence of God has lifted, has gone away, that was covering us, and we were unashamed and naked. Now we are naked and ashamed of ourselves because we can see the condition that we are, yeah, we are alone because the presence of God has left. And so you see how shame comes into the picture. Shame is the wall that we create to show that we are okay, while inside we are feeling awful. And so the God's plan for humanity was to bring himself down with another tree I want to introduce to you, the tree of shame, where God himself hung naked and took our shame. This is our victory. This is our hope. This is where pride and humility, we can see the two other people representing humanity. One is of humility. Oh God, please help me. We are wrong. And the other person is saying, how can I use you? Get off the cross and get me out of the cross. So that sometimes is our humanity. When we say, oh God, if you're in trouble, get me out of the trouble. We don't want to go through the pain and consequence of what we have committed. Irresponsible we become. So I think there is a lot of truth and a lot of time that we need to meditate on how do we return back to God from a place of shame, in a shame culture that is artificially showing, oh, it's all about honor. What honor are we talking about? Whose honor are we talking about? Some tribal chief? Some leaders in the community? No. We're all falling short of the glory of God, of the honor of God. So we all have one pathway, the pathway of the cross. So, how do we come back? And so, it is so important for us to contemplate again. There is no other way we can educate ourselves to kind of some kind of belief that Jesus died for me and therefore I am going to heaven. What heaven are we talking about? So I think that is where the importance of understanding the human condition that began in the Garden of Eden through the contemplation and resulting in disobedience rather than obedience. The only way back is through contemplation and seeing the whole picture and saying, Lord, I choose the tree of life. I choose the pathway of the cross, the tree of shame that you took for us. You became naked and ashamed so that I can experience the resurrection, a rebirth of my life and be born again, start afresh. So we pray the prayer of Saint Patrick to come into the presence of God and say, Christ, Father, I'm here. You are here. I am here. That's the beginning of contemplation, is acknowledging God. Lord, I see you. I see that you're all around me. I see myself here, and my heart is here. My mind is here. I am here. Christ is before me. Christ is behind me. Christ is above me, beneath me, on my right, on my left, all around me, flowing through me, within me, the image of Christ. And I bow to this Christ. And so once we recognize and come into the awareness of where we are and take some deep breaths, we can say, Lord, because you are here and I'm here, I'm breathing the living presence, the tree of life. I'm breathing your love, exhaling fear. I'm breathing the healing, which is the joining, not ripped apart, but the joining, the bonding of my life with the life of God. Let all disease and sickness go away. I am breathing the wisdom of God and exhaling confusion. There is no confusion. God, you are my source of life. I surrender to you. Breathing, therefore, the peace of God, and I don't have to worry. I don't have a lack. I'm free. Anxiety and anger must go. And I'm loved. I'm deeply loved. And so breathing God's energy we want to talk about 5 steps to overcome the shame as you become aware of God. What do we begin to do? First of all, I would suggest we acknowledge our feeling. So we want to write down a negative feeling like fear, anger, and worry. Let me share a story with you. Several years ago, when I was when I graduated from high school with very good marks, I was second in the school actually for pursuing science degree, and I was hoping to get into the medical school. And for some reason, not some reason, because of the quota system in the government there were no private colleges in those days. I'm talking about the 80s, early 80s, and and the government college had the selection was based on caste system, and because I was a Christian, I was forward caste, meaning the top caste, along with Brahmins, and because of that, only 18% of the seats were available. There were 100 seats in 3 colleges, and only 18 seats, and hundreds of people were competing for it, and I couldn't make it. And I was very angry. I was so angry that God failed me, Christianity failed me, and the government failed me. And I was so upset with myself. And that was a shameful thing because all around my family and everybody was expecting me to get into the medical school, and I didn't make it. And because of that, I carried shame, and shame turned into anger. And the anger was my expression of that. I was very angry during my first year in college when I was doing my bachelor's of science in chemistry. Second year and the third year, I started hurting myself in terms of smoking, drinking, smoking marijuana, and getting into parties, neglecting, education, and finally, um, managed to graduate well, and then went into business field. But again, the anger was suppressed in me, was never dealt with until about five 5 years ago during the COVID time. So what I'm trying to say is shame is a powerful thing. Shame is a powerful thing. We suppress that. What happened to me 30 years ago or 40 years ago still had an impact all through my life. It showed up in pastoring, it showed up in marriage, it showed up in parenting, it showed up as frustration in many things. It was a reliving of that shame over and again. The wound was touched when I faced rejection, when I came into this country, and because of my color, I couldn't um, get what normally is available to a white person. So, but God was working all through it. So now we learn to acknowledge, and I'm sharing this so that you can also process. When you're young, you can't process what is going on. I could not process when I was 17 years old. I graduated high school. At that time, I could not. I was a teenager and did not know how to process it. But today we know. So I'm telling you a process through which I went through 5 years ago that has helped me. What am I really feeling now? Getting in touch with emotions is an adult thing. Teenagers don't do that. Getting in touch with the emotions, they just burst out in emotions. But we must understand our humanity by understanding the human emotions, because experiencing God is right there when you experience yourself, meaning your deeper self, which is your heart condition, which is the emotions. So you ask yourself, why am I feeling like this? What triggered this feeling or emotion? Feeling of rejection was one of the main things I experienced when I didn't get admission into the medical college. So, describe all the sensations that you feel that I'm still living out some of that rejection, that wound, of not being enough, of failure. So, what do I feel in my body when I experience that again in terms of another rejection? Oh, sorry, we don't want you here. You're not. We want to. We don't select you for pastoring, or several things have happened for me in my own life. So, first thing is to acknowledge the feelings, acknowledge and write it down. Whether is it fear, is it anger, is it worry, is it anxiety, and what exactly am I feeling in my body as the result of that? Why am I feeling it? Oh, is it connected to my mother's voice? Is it connected to my father's or teachers, what they have said? So you describe the sensation of exactly. So you're trying to disarm the power. The second thing is disarm the power of triggers by recognizing the emotion. Am I feeling sad, or am I feeling anger, or am I anxious? Am I nervous? If I'm nervous, is my pulse high? Is my heart beating faster? Is my hands cold and sweaty? Am I afraid? So you begin to get in touch with your emotions and begin to identify that, is it my father's voice? Is it my mother's voice? Is it my sister or brother shouting at me, or my grandparents? Or is it my teacher's voice yelling at me? Or is it that bully in the school? Is it that neighbor who was, who spoke harshly? Or is it my boss, my pastor, my my leader? Or is it a stranger's voice, who made fun of me when I was in the street or on the street? So you want to disarm that power of triggers, yeah, because you don't want to be constantly triggered by something externally. So identify. So the other way to disarm that is to identify the positive intention. Is there any truth in what was said to me, in the actions or in words? What was going on in my mother's life when she was upset with me? What was going on in my brother's life? What was going on in my neighbor's life? What is going on so you're trying to understand the whole picture, because they might be just throwing things at us, things at you, based on how hurt they are. Was there a positive intention? Were they really trying to advise me? Were they trying to be point me in the right direction? Was there any positive intention behind their words or action? Okay, you want to think about that. Can I extend them the benefit of doubt? For example, I've said this before. I had a lot of anger against my brother-in-law who divorced my sister because of a mental sickness after 17 years of marriage. And I could not forgive him because of the things he did to my mother, and of course to my sister, because he used to beat her with a belt. And as a pastor, she should have never done that in the first place. But I could not forgive him, and I finally thought about, God showed me, was there any good thing he had done? And that helped me forgive him, because I thought about the first 6 years he was so kind to her, and he was, until he got very frustrated and gave up and ended up divorcing her, you know, 17 years later with after 3 children. So how do you release people to God? Uh, you basically, we have to write down people. This is what I did. Who hurt me in the first 10 years of my life, in the first 20 years, um, first 30 years, first 40 years, first 50 years of my life. All through each decade of my life, I went down and wrote the people I hurt and the people that have hurt me, and I began to release them to God. Allow yourself. I cried over, and this was an amazing process over 32 weeks that slowly was able to release them into God's hands and pray for them and begin to pray for them. And then your third step is to develop self-compassion. Be compassionate to yourself. Treat yourself with kindness, especially because it's not your mistake. It's not anybody else's mistake. that we are responding like this. This is the human condition. Once we understand that this is my condition and it's their condition, then we begin to understand and share some common ground and say, okay, let's forgive and let me be the big person to forgive others. So deep healing happens when we are asking God to cleanse the wound. Remember, when there is a wound, it has to be cleansed. That's why we put antiseptic ointment, we put alcohol and clean it, dress it up, clean it again, dress it up, clean it again, and then one day it's healed. It takes time to heal. So deep healing can be done when we bring the hurt to God each day and say, God, cleanse me. Again, I feel it. Cleanse me again. Cleanse me. Cleanse my wound again because I know that you will heal me. And we will find healing. I found a lot of healing to my deep hurts. And then, fourthly, you begin to share this with trustworthy people. You begin to build um, somebody whom you trust, and you begin to share with a mentor, with a coach, with a pastor, with a leader, or your friend whom you can trust. And then you slowly build a network of safe people and a safe community where you will be accepted because they are also sharing their wounds. And together we can have koinonia. Koinonia is not eating naan and parota and chicken curry together and feeling good. No, it's about sharing our internal feeling. That is the true koinonia. That is the true church. That is the birth of church when hurt people come together and find healing presence. And that our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thou art Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals. It is in the community that our spirituality is healed and formed. In that way, we are able to develop empathy for others by openly sharing in the pain, sharing in the struggle, and not one person thinking, oh, how silly of you that you look at me. I accepted Christ and everything is gone. I think that's really false. That somebody can say, it's all gone. It doesn't go anywhere. We work through all our years of releasing people, fighting resentment and pulling out bitter roots, developing long term habits by practicing gratitude. Here is an amazing way. Once we learn how to be thankful every day, things you have received each day, words of encouragement and support people have shared with us, people that God has brought along our way, opportunities to do things in life, to go to places, to start new things, and to start new ministries, to help others. These are gifts, and we have to thank God for that every day. Become more mindful of where we are. When we walk to, outside, we need to be mindful of the nature that is around us, that is meant for our healing. Observe where we are. Instead of always being in our head worrying. And so once we begin to do that, we'll be able to reframe negative thoughts with positive thoughts about ourselves. God, I'm here. I'm your beloved child. I am not the one that Satan keeps. Remember, Satan is an accuser of the brethren, always accusing you, making you small. God is not like that. God is always enlarging us, helping us to grow up into full potential as little mustard seed that becomes a large tree. That is the kingdom of God and the presence of God, enlarging us. Practice self care, exercise your body, mind, and spirit. It is so important to exercise our body because, I'll share in another video on how dopamine, endorphins, um, serotonin, and oxytocin works in the body to create the whole sense of well being in our whole being. So it's important to exercise our body, our mind must be exercised by reading scripture, meditating, learning, growing, being curious, and spirit always yielding to God. That is our wholeness and wellness. Practice community, engaging people authentically, not with masks, removing the mask and saying, I have a problem and I need prayer. Engaging in positive activities. These are habits that we can learn to deal with shame by getting better and better at what we are good at, doing things that we enjoy. And this is one thing that I enjoy doing. So I'm going to do it. Whether people want it or not, I'm just going to do it because I enjoy sharing and doing these kind of short videos. So as we come to an end of this time together, I want you to watch this video a couple of times so that when we come back on Wednesday, we can discuss and say and practice this. How do we practice the presence of God and allow God to begin the healing and the cleansing process? May the Lord bless you and have a great weekend. Thank you.